here is a transformation in technology that really changed the landscape of the logistics of moving humans around in, say, an urban environment.
Let's hear from the experts about how artificial intelligence is transforming the world of business. I'm Katie Gaertner, and this is Unsupervised. Hey, Business Badgers. Today I'm sitting with Kaitlin Daniels, a supply chain professor here at the Wisconsin School of Business. Kaitlin earned her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business, and she studies the design of incentives in gig economies like the one created by Uber. And especially she focuses on the implications of those incentives for workers and consumers. So Kaitlin, thank you for joining me. Let's talk about supply chain and AI.
Thanks for having me, Katie. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So first, you're going to need to lay the groundwork for us. What is supply chain? Why is supply chain management a major here at the business school?
Great. Yes. So I think this is easiest to describe through an example. Imagine that you're a firm, and you're a firm, let's say, that makes cars. A firm that makes cars has all sorts of capabilities, but they actually don't make every piece of a car. Instead, they rely on lots of other companies to make a bunch of components. Think like sheet metal, screws, all sorts of fasteners, and semiconductors, for example. Okay, so this raises a bunch of questions like, who should we buy these things from? How much of them should we buy? How should we get those components to our facility? And it doesn't end there. Once you have those components, you turn them into a car. Now you have to start thinking about how do you get that car to your consumers, right? Are you going to sell directly to them, or are you going to sell through dealerships? If you sell directly, where are your facilities? Think Tesla. How are you actually physically going to move those cars around? So supply chain management is all about coordinating the flow of goods from raw material to final consumer. And I just want to emphasize that even though I use this example of a car manufacturer that's making physical goods, that supply chain management also is really important for services. Think about a hospital. Hospital, definitely a very important service providing healthcare, but a hospital also needs to procure all sorts of really complex components like chemo drugs and sutures. And they also have to think about the delivery of their services. You can have a simple kind of arrangement where your patients come to your hospital, but lots of hospitals also operate a network of clinics. Some of them might have mobile services like your mammogram vans. So this idea of the coordination of goods from raw material to final consumption is really important across the board.
Okay. So now that I know what supply chain management is, how do you see AI being used in this field?
Yeah, so first I think I should be clear about what I think AI means. I think of AI as any algorithm that makes it so that computers can perform as well as, or maybe even better than humans at a task.
Great.
A particular version of AI that has been transforming how we think about supply chains is computer vision. So think of this in a production setting. We have had a long history of move from manual tasks to automated tasks, and computer vision is one more step on that path. Some factories have even gone what they call dark, so not relying on humans to perform their tasks, instead primarily relying on robots. Dark because you don't need to have the lights on if it's only run by robots. Similarly, in warehousing, we see a move from humans navigating the aisles, picking items off of the shelf, to robots bringing the shelves to human pickers who then assemble your order at, say, an Amazon warehouse. And then transportation, right? A move from humans driving the trucks to self-driving vehicles. And all of this use of computer vision has a few, I think, important implications. One is about the layout of space. Like, how do we use our limited resources, especially in a physical space kind of setting? Dark factories can have a smaller footprint, which means they can actually be closer to their end consumers. Same idea with warehouses that have these robots that are moving shelves around. Kind of a similar idea when you think about transportation. Self-driving cars, the ideal version, they actually communicate with each other. And so an individual vehicle can take up less road space because you need to leave less of a buffer between them, which is particularly important when we think about dense urban settings.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that this is going to have, it is already having, but is going to continue to have a huge impact on how we think about supply chains.
Yeah, those are some really interesting examples. It's really like got my brain thinking about like, oh, wow, all of the things that are possible and things that might change. Okay, so maybe you can share with me some examples of how AI is changing the way companies compete and pushing companies to adapt their traditional business models to a new landscape.
Absolutely. So my favorite example of this is the one that I study, which is a ride-hailing marketplace. So you think you want on-demand transportation from point A to point B. 20 years ago, you had to rely on a taxi. And that taxi was operating without any AI or any kind of sophistication, right? You would stand on the curb and you would stick your hand out and you would try to hail them down. Maybe you would call a dispatcher who then would send out some message on a radio, but we're talking very low-tech kind of dispatch. Then, about 10 years ago, Uber enters the scene. Uber enters the scene and they introduce a new service that is really based on this idea of new technology, right? We all have smartphones, and so Uber is able to keep track of the location of where I, the passenger, am, where all of the network of drivers are, so that they can use an algorithm to perform these matches between folks who want a ride and drivers who want to provide a ride, which makes the service much more appealing in a lot of settings. Makes it so that I, as the passenger, don't have to wait as long. The driver doesn't have to spend a bunch of time wandering around empty, not getting paid. And there are a bunch of downstream implications from this that I think a lot of people appreciate about the service. The fact that you have automatic payment and rating system, et cetera, et cetera. So here is a transformation in technology that really changed the landscape of the logistics of moving humans around in, say, an urban environment. And I think that this transformation is not going to stop there. Right? We have new players like Waymo, who has now moved from an Uber model where the drivers are humans to a model where the cars drive themselves. Okay, so they have a lot of the same advantages in the sense that the cars certainly have all sorts of sensors in them so that Waymo knows where they are. And Waymo has an app where they also keep track of where you, the passenger, are. And so this formation of matches can also have this nice centralized kind of flavor to it. But now on top of that, Waymo can control the locations of cars. Instead of relying on drivers to decide for themselves, do I want to drive today? If so, when? If so, where? Now we have a centralized decision maker who can synthesize all of these data that they're collecting and turn them into algorithms that can make the service hopefully even better.
Yeah, so I've heard about Waymo. It seems like it's mostly in urban communities right now, centered, especially warm climate urban communities, San Francisco, Austin, and I think Phoenix. Do you anticipate Waymo expanding to areas where they don't have as much control over the climate, for example?
Interesting. I think the answer is yes. I know that they are in the process of rolling out some new locations. There's some interesting questions about the business model. Some of these new locations may be in partnership with a platform like Uber instead of Waymo being in charge of the matching. I think that you're right that weather is an additional friction to the question of driving around. But that's, I think, really comes to this question, the kind of definition of AI. We need the drivers, right, in this case, the cars themselves, to be at least as good as humans. Right. And what I think you're identifying is a potential gap between where we are now and where we're trying to be.
Okay. That's exciting, though. It's a fun thing to think about.
Definitely.
All right. So how do you see job roles in supply chain evolving and changing due to AI? And specifically, what kind of skills do you think our emerging supply chain professionals here at Wisconsin need to develop to be competitive in the space?
Yeah. So I think that AI and the incorporation of AI into supply chain actually creates a whole bunch of opportunities that require the kind of higher level thinking that we try to teach here at the Wisconsin School of Business. So the first kind of set of skills I would say is that AI is both built on and generates a lot of data. So our students need to be comfortable with collecting and analyzing those data. They're important inputs to AI algorithms, and also those AI algorithms say, like, again, I'm thinking about self-driving cars, they're also then spitting off a bunch of data that you want to be able to use. And so then that's the second piece. How do you use those data? And in supply chain and operations in general, we really enjoy solving optimization problems. And the more information you have, the more granular that information, the more you can keep track over time how things change, the more opportunities you have to have really sophisticated optimization models to help you make better decisions. So I would say those are two pieces that are increasingly important, and many more opportunities in those spaces that I think are very exciting for our students.
Thank you. Okay, so speaking of exciting, what are some of the most exciting or transformative developments in AI in supply chain that you're excited about?
Yeah, so kind of speaking of using the data, something that I have kind of observed is the use of what folks sometimes call digital twins in order to make these kinds of decisions. So digital twin is a digital representation of a physical process or, say, a supply chain that's built on a big data set that is dynamically evolving. Okay, and so the idea is to basically simulate this physical process or supply chain so that you can then understand how modifications might impact the system. And this is really useful in really complex settings. So digital twins are used, like I said, across a whole bunch of different domains. For example, the Red Bull F1 car racing team, like they built their own Formula One cars. They use digital twins for the understanding how changes to the design of the car will impact performance.
Oh, okay.
So you have this kind of digital environment where you can then explore what potential modifications, what are the implications of these potential modifications. So supply chains also really complex settings. That's actually why we study them. You go back hundreds of years, manufacturing was much simpler, right? You dig something out of the ground, you do some things to it, your consumers are right next door, there's not much of a supply chain.
Yeah.
Now we live in an environment where supply chains are long, physically, right? They span the globe, and also long in terms of the number of steps, right? The number of organizations that are involved in transforming a raw material into a useful good or service.
Yeah.
And so that complexity is, I think, where the value of something like this sophisticated simulation of an environment can be really useful for evaluating, kind of basic questions like how much of this product should I buy, to the kinds of questions that I think we are more sensitive to post-COVID, like what would the impact of a certain kind of disruption be?
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so when you say digital twin, like my mind goes very dystopian at first, but this is like a digital simulation
Yes.
of a process or something that we can fiddle with and tweak and make changes to without the cost of making those changes to our actual supply chain or our actual factory.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a really cool opportunity. I imagine that opportunity of digital twins can be expanded to like a lot of systems, like
Absolutely.
you mentioned hospitals and other things so that's a very exciting development.
Absolutely. I've read about researchers trying to build digital twins of like the human heart to try to better understand healthcare interventions. And then, of course, companies like Amazon, right, they're using a really sophisticated model to forecast their demand across, just a zillion, if I can use the technical term, zillion products.
Yeah.
Which then they use for planning how much to buy, where to locate it in which warehouse, Where do they want to build new warehouses? The kinds of questions that we in supply chain management care about.
Yes, yeah. And as an Amazon consumer, I also care about it.
Fair enough.
I like next day shipping.
Me too.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up with a fun question. If you could invent, or if you could take a task or a responsibility and offload it to AI or a bot and never have to do it again, what robot would you invent?
Oh my goodness, that is easy.
Okay, I'm ready.
I would invent the house cleaning robot.
Yes.
Which I have, the versions that exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am very reliant on my Roomba. I recently bought a mowing robot for my backyard.
Okay.
It's very cute. But the trouble is that there isn't a robot that does all of the tasks. And this is such a difficulty with automation, right? You really need, or the easiest tasks, I should say, are the ones that are repeated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the opportunity for AI to allow a robot to be more adaptable. So my robot doesn't just vacuum my floor, but it also cleans my counters, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, because you don't want to have a robot that cuts your vegetables and a robot that fries your vegetables and a robot that makes the rice, right? That's not a very useful, it's useful in a factory at scale.
Right.
But when we start bringing these automations and robotics into households, they need to be more multi-purpose and more adaptable. I'm ready to buy the first off of the production line, the first housekeeping robot that you make. So I'm ready.
I'll keep you posted.
Okay, great. Kaitlin, I've learned so much from you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and to my students about AI and supply chain, and grateful for your expertise. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Unsupervised is brought to you by the Wisconsin School of Business. It's written and hosted by Katie Gaertner, with sound editing and production by Derek Schneider and Billy Kardaj.